All right. Welcome, everyone, to our Salon number 63, Feminist Radio, the Gift of Women's Voices, with Frieda, Werden, Maria Suarez Toro, and Genevieve Vaughan in the Maternal Gift Economy Breaking Through series, hosted by the International Feminists for a Gift Economy. We're so happy to have Frieda, who's calling in today from Canada, and Maria Suarez, who's calling in from Costa Rica. I'm Letecia Layson in Austin, Texas, your moderator. I'll give some short introductions and turn the mic over to Anne, who will just say hello and give us a little overview. It was her inspiration to bring these two together today in this salon for you. Genevieve Vaughan is an independent researcher who lives part-time in Italy and part-time in Texas. In 1987 to 2005, she created a multicultural women's activist foundation for compassionate society and founded the Sekhmet Temple in the Nevada desert in 1992 that continues on today. She's an author of many books. She is the founding mother of the maternal gift economy, a theorist, a philosopher. She's written many articles. You can find her full bio at our website. Frieda Werden is co-founder and series producer of Wings, Women's International News Gathering Service, which provides women's voices and issues covered to non-commercial radio. The project started with a contact list from a radio women's meeting called by Genevieve Vaughan at the third Conference on Women in Nairobi in 1985. Maria Suarez Toro is a feminist journalist, an activist in defense of human rights, and an educator. She was born in Puerto Rico, has been resident in San Jose, Costa Rica for close to 50 years. She was the co-director of Feminist International Radio Endeavor, FIRE, from 1991 to 2001, of which she is the co-founder. She's worked as an educator in literacy in many countries and is an activist of many things. And her most recent thing that she has done is citizen archaeology, archaeomythology, and she is a certified scuba diver. So with that, I would like to invite Jen just to say a few words, say hello, and why you brought us together.
Thank you, Letecia. Yeah, many years ago, I was part of the organizing group of the Peace Tent in Nairobi. That was the UN Decade for Women final conference. And we had women there that from countries that were at war with each other that came together and spoke together and discussed things in front of the audience in this peace tent. And I realized then, as I had also before, that women speaking with each other and to each other internationally is a very important thing to have happen. And I had thought about trying to do women's radio then, but so I organized a meeting there in Nairobi about radio and women's radio, and we got all the women that came to it to sign up, and then somehow that list got sent to Frieda Werden, who was doing women's radio at the time. I don't know how she got it, but from some way, how it happened. And then she contacted me, and through many gyrations and so forth, finally she came to work with the Foundation for a Compassionate Society that was the foundation that I had started there in Austin, Texas, an all women's foundation, operating foundation, doing a lot of different projects. And at that same time, soon after that, I had wanted to find an international woman, a woman of color who would be able to do the Global South radio. And through people that I knew, we met on the phone with Maria Suarez, and she was just the right person to do that. And so she came on board to do that radio program, and I'll let them talk about it. But it has been, since then, it has been a great collaboration with both of these women for many years. And I think they have both contributed a whole lot to the women's movements and are still doing it. So thank you very much, Frieda and Maria, for speaking here on this program.
Thank you. Whoa. Yeah, it's been a heck of a good ride. Let's see. Oh, yes. Well, I was nervous about forgetting things, and so I wrote a script, and I'll read from it, but then maybe there'll be some ad-libbing. Let's see. All right. So I'll start by saying that feminist radio is both a gift from me and other women and a gift to us as well. It's a pleasure, a craft, and one always hopes a contribution to understanding, progress, and peace. That may be true of most gifts we all give in this world, but my focus has been on radio for a very long time. I like that radio is voice. I think in many ways, sound and the voice are the most intimate ways we connect with one another. There's not just an intellectual element to sounds, they also convey emotion. And let's not forget that we could hear our mother's voices even before we were born. I grew up listening to radio, and I still do. It's a wonderful free gift. We didn't have TV until I was 12. When I was 5, we had a big wooden radio that sat in the hall outside the kitchen, and I sat by it every Thursday evening to listen to the Lone Ranger. The big attraction was mainly its wonderful intro music from the William Tell Overture by Rossini. Dum da da dum da da dum dum dum, I-O Silver, away. I had a favorite kids show on Saturdays on which people read stories aloud, and the same stories were often repeated. Kids do like stories repeated. I remember hearing The Master and Margarita, where the boss makes the girl memorize all his long, stupid names for things, so it takes terribly long to tell him that the house is on fire. Once in the daytime, listening to the headboard radio in my parents' bedroom, I heard Mary Margaret McBride, the first woman in the US to have her own nationally syndicated live radio talk show. My parents gave me a radio of my own for my 11th birthday, and I kept it under my bed so I could lean down and secretly listen to comedy shows after bedtime. There were quite a few women. Gracie Allen got all the laughs in her show with George Burns, and I learned about sound effects from Fibber McGee and Molly. At some point in every show, Fibber opened a closet door and everything came crashing out. When I left home for college in Michigan, I forgot about radio, but I didn't forget about listening to women, even though I had no women professors. Margaret Mead, for example, came and spoke at our school in person. In the summer of 1965, I traveled weekly for 4 weeks from my school in the burbs to Detroit to attend 4 classes with Marxist humanist theorist Raya Dunayevskaya. I was 18. Among other attractions, I liked the clicks her false teeth made when she talked. She said she had been Trotsky's private secretary, but left him over his continued support for the Russian Revolution. She said, Marx said that the revolution will happen in an advanced industrial society, and she took off for the United States. That fall, I transferred to the University of Texas. Boy, was that different. Skipping over the boring parts. In 1969, feminism finally came to Austin. I got involved and things got interesting. In 1972, a friend of my uncle offered me a volunteer job of recruiting guests for a radio series for Longhorn Radio Network under the anodyne title Women Today. I picked the guests, gave notes to the interviewer, offered the guests coffee and the washroom, and ushered them to the studio, where the Venerable Beulah Hodge was the host. I got to watch and listen from the control room. We had 13 programs in that series. I tried to get Sissy Farenthold on. Excuse me. She was the only woman in the Texas House of Representatives at that time, and our Women's Liberation Group had watched from the balcony the day she got the Texas Equal Legal Rights Amendment passed out of committee. The Business and Professional Women's Club had been testifying for that every session for around 25 years and been laughed at for their trouble. Sissy declined to be interviewed. Oh, she, by the way, is Genevieve's cousin. But I did get our only woman state senator to come on the show, and the programs were distributed statewide. Back then, the FCC required broadcasters to devote some free airtime to public service programming, and Reagan later killed that rule. After Women Today, I produced another series called What's Normal, about homosexual lifestyles. It was distributed nationally. I got my first experience editing audio tape because lesbian activist Robin Birdfeather kept saying interesting things after the show was supposed to end. Next, I applied to the, and back then, well, maybe I'd tell about how we edited later. Next, I applied to the Texas Committee for the Humanities to produce a series called Bureaucracy on the Line. That was inspired by the lobbying work that Margaret Nunley and other unisex haircutters were doing to stop the law that kept barbers and beauticians from cutting hair together in the same shop. Each profession had gotten a rule passed that there had to be a wall between those chairs, and one required a higher wall than the other. The funder nixed that topic, but approved some others. The funds were designed to pay humanities scholars to interact with a live audience. So my workaround to make this media was to produce short documentaries and play them on the air while two scholars in the studio and the audience at home listened. We let the scholars discuss first and then took calls. My favorite episode was about the Texas welfare system. We'd recorded 2 local welfare rights activists who were brilliant and 1 social worker. A woman audio engineer, Mary Isnaga, brought open reel recording equipment into the social worker's office, and we recorded her making some fairly unpleasant remarks about welfare mothers. But neither of us had noticed that there was a coffee percolator blumping away in the background. I had to cut out every blump that was in the clear using a razor blade, a tiny miter box, and splicing tape. It was good practice. By the way, that was the only show that none of the audience would call in. I phoned a friend and got her to call in and ask questions. I produced other projects with that radio station and network, including a radio drama about a settler woman in Texas history who had been abducted by the Comanches, married a man in their tribe and had children, and then was abducted back by the white people, which she did not appreciate at all. The radio drama experience helped me get a great job when I moved to New York in 1982. I became associate producer for an NPR docudrama series about novelist Willa Cather, and I even got to visit her home in Nebraska. I helped direct actors Colleen Dewhurst and Diane Wiest, recording for that. I did editing, and I worked on the music mix with top audio engineers in Washington, D.C. After that, the producer, Joellen Ratcliffe, had another grant come through from the same funder, National Endowment for the Humanities. This one covered 13 Latin American fiction writers, and I ended up going to D.C. and managing that project. Joellen had told the scholars that picked the authors that she refused to produce a series with only one woman in it. So the 2 women were Elena Poniatowska of Mexico and Clarice Lispector of Brazil. I produced those shows myself, and I got to go to Brazil with a woman engineer who was also my translator and interview the 2 best friends of the late Lispector. They had been holding her hands when she died. Meanwhile, though, the cultural and political tide were turning. Reagan came to power. He put a right-wing woman in charge of the National Endowment for the Humanities. She reportedly said that they would not fund any projects about women. I tried proposing a drama by the 10th century German canonist Roswitha, which I thought might be safe enough, but no, even that was too feminist. It was the only one of Roswitha's plays in which the women didn't knuckle under to the authority. NPR had fallen deeply in debt. They had already laid off my boss, Joellen. After the Latin America project was finished, I worked on one paid stint as a relief attendant in the NPR archives. But when I sorted and rearranged the one file drawer where they had put all the cards on stories about women, they never wanted to see me there again. Luckily, another woman who had worked at NPR came up to me as I was waiting at a nearby bus stop and offered me a summer job at Current Public Broadcasting publication. I worked there for a year, learned to use a computer, and discovered the newsletter Media Report to Women, which was created, edited, and mostly written by Dr. Donna Allen, founder of Women's Institute for Freedom of the Press. I recently finished writing a manifesto about feminist media for a forthcoming book, and I organized it around Donna Allen's framework for feminist media, which spoke to me deeply and still helps guide my feminist radio work. I'll read a little of it here. So this is from, everything was very concise that she wrote. This one's called 3 Principles of Feminist Journalism. 1, no attacks on people. 2, more factual information. 3, people should speak for themselves. And she continued to say, people speaking for themselves provide not only more accurate information, but information that is more diverse, complex, direct, honest, and reliable, imaginative, and lively than anyone else can make it, reporting secondhand. She also came up with 8 differences between men's and women's journalism, and these are just the headlines from that. 1, conventional journalism of male-owned media reports news in the third person. 2, men tend to define news as conflict and violence. 3, male-owned media claim a journalistic goal of objectivity. And of course, objectivity is why women are not supposed to report on women, or minorities are not supposed to report on minorities, but white guys can report on everything, right? Okay, 4, women-owned media are nearly all non-hierarchical. 5, women's media would replace the competitiveness of male media's scoops and financial rivalry with cooperation. 6, women-owned media tend toward a common carrier concept of journalistic function. And what she means by that is that these media are open to a wide diversity of submissions from other women. 7, the greatest difference from male-owned media is women's characteristic analysis of mass media as hostile to women. The 8th difference is content. And here she quotes from sources that describe mainstream media as almost never covering the women's movement, except occasionally in a hostile manner. I would add that from my experience, the mainstream media has been more willing to report what bad happens to women or how wrong they may have been than what the women do to overcome it, or the powerful, humane, and positive things women do. Okay, back when I was living in New York, I also made contacts and put in some time with volunteer-based community radio. Now we're getting to what I like. Judith Mahoney Pasternak and Catherine Davenport co-produced a weekly international show called 51%, the Women's News. Later, another producer used the title 51% for her women's show in another city, but Judy and Catherine had it first. They would use the phone in the WBAI radio studio to call and interview women around the world. While I was in DC, they asked me to cover the unveiling of the statue of Jeanette Rankin, the first woman elected to the US Congress. She was from Montana, and she got there in 1916. She was the only member of Congress who voted against US entry into both world wars. I edited and voiced that report at home and played it to them through the phone from my closet. I just held the phone up to the tape recorder. But I guess it sounded okay at the other end. I don't know. Judith and I also called an impromptu women's news session at the National Federation of Community Radio Broadcast Conference in Washington, D.C. A lot of women came to that, and we made contacts, and the discussions were very good. In 1985, I was hired to manage a training and production facility in San Francisco called Western Public Radio. Catherine Davenport had also moved to the Bay Area around the same time. We met up there, and she was living actually in the community radio station in Berkeley, KPFA, where she volunteered intensively in their women's department. The department had its own room, it had good equipment, and a full-time paid coordinator. Later, all that would be lost. And there were even several attempts to cancel the remaining program produced by the Women's Collective. I helped on a couple of occasions by calling the program director of KPFA and asking her not to cancel the show. I think that helped. The show is still going, I believe, though reduced to a half-hour weekly. I had been promised when I took the job in San Francisco that I could produce any project I wanted. So Catherine moved in with me and we started organizing what became WINGS, Women's International News Gathering Service. Sandra Ratley, who ran NPR's Satellite Program Development Fund, gave us a director's discretionary grant to support the pilot. Shortly thereafter, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting defunded that whole fund and took exclusive granting authority for itself. WINGS applied to their radio fund and got a letter quoting reviewers as having said, "This is an idea whose time has passed. And in a better world, these things would be covered by NPR." Is somebody trying to stop me? I hear noise. Okay.
We can't hear it. You're good.
Okay. The WINGS pilot went out on public radio satellite in May 1986, and our anniversary, 38 years, will be May 13th. Soon after that, the head of Western Public Radio told me to stop working on WINGS since it was not funded. We'd been reaching out for stories all over, and more material was starting to come in, including an interview with the first woman member of the Russian Politburo. So I was not willing to stop. Then the National Federation of Community Radio Broadcasters offered me $250 to attend the conference of the World Association of Community Radio Broadcasters, known by its French initials MARC. They were holding their second World Conference in Vancouver, Canada, straight up the coast from San Francisco. Catherine and I made arrangements for rides and billeting so we could both attend on that one subsidy. This would turn out to be immensely important in the life of WINGS. Community radio stations around the world now carry WINGS, and women producers at those stations share content with WINGS. As I have written elsewhere, community radio is a gift economy, offering training, facility use, production opportunities, content, and genuine community as gifts. As other media compete for people's eyes and ears, I hope community radio can continue to be sustained. When I got back from Vancouver, I had been fired in absentia. I sued because I'd had a contract and eventually got some compensation. But in the meantime, I found other work. It was odd work, but I won't go into that. Catherine and I kept producing WINGS with the help of some women audio engineers who mixed the shows with us at night in the stations where they worked. Luckily, I had good equipment I'd bought while working for NPR, and Catherine had studio access at KPFA. Part of the impetus for creating WINGS was that the UN's Third World Conference on Women took place in Nairobi, Kenya in the fall of 1985. I'd attended the first UN conference on women in Mexico in 75, and I asked NPR to send me to Kenya, but they said it wasn't important. After I was gone, they ended up sending several reporters, one of whom shared some content with WINGS. Unbeknownst to us, Genevieve Vaughan, a fan of women's radio, who, like Catherine and me, is from Texas, was at the Nairobi conference. She called a meeting of women radio producers there, and two different women who'd attended that, here's your answer, Jen, sent us that contact list of radio women from around the world. There was no email back then, so we wrote letters to all those women. Not long after that, we got a letter from Sissy Farenthold in Texas, enclosing a gift check from an anonymous donor for WINGS. That really encouraged us not to quit. We started producing a program a month, which we released on NPR satellite and to non-NPR stations on cassettes. Eventually, we went to weekly distribution on community radio satellites and on cassettes in the mail, then CDs in the mail, and now via online distribution, which does save money and time. Not too long after WINGS started, we got invited to a retreat convened by Genevieve Vaughan in Texas. she had asked a variety of women radio producers to come advise her on how to spend $10,000 toward furthering women's radio. Many of those women were afraid of the word feminist. Some said $10,000 would pay a fundraiser to write a grant to raise $250,000, which is what they believed would be necessary to produce a women's program that would meet NPR's standards. I said $10,000 would keep Wings going for a year. A couple of the women told me they'd heard that Wings was terrible. Eventually, those women did become allies, but it took a while. Ultimately, the group grudgingly agreed on starting a women's radio guild, but that never happened, and eventually the funds came back to Jen. Jen had been hoping some of us would be able to advise her on establishing a shortwave presence for feminist radio. Not then, but later, I was able to help connect her to the shortwave station Radio for Peace International out of Costa Rica. Maria Suarez was hired to lead that show, and she'll talk about that after me. After the huge 1989 earthquake that hit San Francisco, Catherine and I relocated ourselves and Wings to Kansas City in association with a friendly community radio station. Around then, Jen started getting me involved in some of her other activities, including plans for shortwave. Catherine died fairly suddenly in Kansas City from leukemia. Not long after that, Genevieve invited me to come to Austin and work with her Foundation for a Compassionate Society while continuing to produce Wings. That was an incredibly vibrant period of passionate feminist communications. There was even a training and production facility in an old house for radio and TV. Wings was able to record many brilliant women activists who passed through that organization and spoke at events that were organized and so forth. And we also got to go to some conferences that we attended in association with the foundation. After the foundation era ended, I moved to Vancouver, Canada in 2002 and worked at a campus community radio station part-time for 12 years until I retired. In 2015, Suzette Cullen and I hosted a women's media camp, bringing trainers from various countries to our local community. It included a live broadcast from a First Nations reserve in conjunction with an art exhibit called Walking with Our Sisters, which highlighted missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. That was such an interesting combination. Anyway, 9 years later, I'm still producing and distributing Wings in collaboration with other radio women around the world. It's an intense art form. Unlike podcasts, the length of a radio show needs to be pretty exact. Also, the radio listener can't go back to check on something that they missed or misheard, so the sequence needs to be set up properly, the information organized for absorption by the listener. There are also issues of emotional trajectory and pacing, and fact-checking and pronunciation checking, and for an international program, capturing succinctly enough historical and geographical and political context to help the listeners understand. I tend to spend hours, sometimes days or months, working on and thinking about a show, listening back, adjusting the loudness, adding thinking space, agonizing over what and how to cut and where to put things. Luckily, some of the earlier shows we produced need relatively little updating to be just as apt for this time and the next generation. Really, it's unfortunate that we haven't made more progress on those, but those ideas still need to come forward. I really love it when I get a chance to work on a new show in collaboration with another producer. If any of you listening like doing this kind of project, please get in touch. You can email wings@wings.org. I'm still a champion for the International Community Radio Movement and also the International Association of Women in Radio and Television and the Maternal Gift Economy movement. I love the big group of intelligent, generous, and compassionate women who meet up and conspire for change through this network. Final word. Archiving and preserving and even recirculating women's stories are all very important because women's history, our experiences, our knowledge, our achievements are very vulnerable to erasure, and they've certainly been erased a lot in the past. I'm done with this presentation for now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Frieda. That was really wonderful. I loved hearing the whole iteration, and we are grateful that you continue to do the work today. And I hope that women answer the call.
Thank you.
All
It's
right.
fun, y'all. It's really fun.
It's not all hard work. It's fun. Okay, great. Maria, are you ready? We're ready for you.
Oh my God. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are right now. I'm really happy to be with you. But before I start, I have to tell you what it's been like to be able to do this broadcast, Zoomcast, from the tent outside my house, because the phone got really hot. And the movement that Frieda thought was about silencing her was really that I had to take the run to take the phone and put it in the refrigerator so that it would cool off, so that I could come back to be able to be with you. So that happens so often doing radio that that it happened now. It's really incredible with this media. And the reason why I was not very surprised that this happened to me is because my first experience of radio, although I always said that I didn't do radio before, Feminist International Radio Endeavor, which is what I'm going to talk to you about, was an experience that I had during the war in El Salvador in 1984, when a group of 4 very young campesino guerrilla women and I, as a teacher of literacy, were asked to be able to do a radio broadcast in the revolutionary radio station that they carried in a donkey all over the mountains of El Salvador, to be able to broadcast what was happening with the communities in what they called the liberated zones, which were areas of El Salvador during the revolutionary process to oust the dictatorship. The 50s year dictatorship in El Salvador. And they had this shortwave radio station that was carried in a donkey. His name was Horacio. And we would broadcast by walking next to it in whatever circumstance in the mountains, to be able to bring news to the people worldwide and in El Salvador about the dictatorship and what people's organizations and the revolutionaries were trying to do to oust the dictatorship. The only rule that we had about doing radio in that context was that we could not talk about what was going on around us when we were on the air. And the reason was because we could be being bombed. They could be throwing mortars at us or coming after us. And if we would say that that was happening, then they would immediately track us and bomb us. So we could not talk about the surroundings. So when Genevieve finally approached me about doing women's radio, I already had this experience about doing it anywhere, in any context, and being able to speak about what's happening around us. Why? Because I only lasted 1 month in that dynamic that I explained to you in Radio Venceremos in El Salvador. Because one day I was broadcasting, and so we heard the bomb explode, and I said, shit, girls, we have to run. They're bombing us. And that was the last time I was allowed to speak in the radio. That was my last experience. So let me go then into Feminist International Radio Endeavor. I carried with me 3 things from that experience in the mountains of El Salvador. Number 1, ordinary people don't have a voice in radio. And that is what the world needs to hear. And thank all of that movement, that today we are getting the news directly from the people in Palestine about what is happening to them through their phones. At that time, we didn't have that. We had to build movements of people in radio, movements of people in communication, and especially women. The second thing that I learned from that experience is that there was a way in which you had to handle the technology yourself. because it's called the controls, and whoever controls technology of radio, of Zoom, or of anything has the control about who comes on the air or not. So having the technical controls was really critical. And the third one that I learned is that radio, in order to be independent, had to be done and framed in the way that nature provides for us the gifts of life. Because voice is, and especially voice of the voiceless, is the gift of life. So let me begin with the first slide. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see them because I'm talking from my phone. Thank you. So let me go into the first slide. When we started Feminist International Radio Endeavor in 1991, and I will provide the context in a few minutes, but I want to tell you that the only thing that with Genevieve and with Katerina, who was my colleague, and I hope she's listening to us today, all of the fire staff between 1991 and 2012 are trying to come to this Zoomcast today. But we developed one slogan, which was connecting voices, technologies, and actions, giving women a voice worldwide. And this was in 1991 when we started shortwave. Jen told you why she started it, and also Frieda. But the broadband radio in that moment was the only international broadcast feminist radio program. At that time, there was no internet. And there was a lot of movement of women doing radio, as Frieda well explained, and also globally when she talked about the women in community radios, which was a global movement that was giving women a voice worldwide. But there was no international venue yet. And so when we realized that we had in our hands a feminist radio that Genevieve had negotiated with Radio for Peace International, that it would be autonomous, that she was going to hire a set of women that were going to do 2 hours of radio, one in Spanish, one in English, every day in the shortwave radio station, but that the women were going to run the program themselves. Now, autonomy in negotiation in radio stations is very important, and Genevieve did that, but autonomy is built on a day-to-day process also. And so I will go through you in the next slide, but first of all, I want you to understand that internationalizing the global movement of feminism was one of the main tasks that we realized that we had our hand, because it was a moment in the development of the feminist movement where the movement was becoming international. I'm not going to talk to you about radio between 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, because Frieda did that. And in Latin America, it took the form of community radio stations and radio programs that were going on, not only in Latin America, but also in Africa, in Asia, and many other countries. And that is a history that still has to be told. But I have to go into the next slide by telling you that the movement of our radio program, Feminist International on shortwave, was very closely attached umbilically to the fact that the feminist movement was becoming internationalized also in the beginning of that decade. I didn't realize that until afterwards, but it has been a very critical umbilical connection that was strengthened mutually or reciprocally. The feminist movement globalizing itself strengthened the radio program, and the radio program strengthened that movement. So I cannot read the slides for you, but I am going to talk to you about them. It was born May 1st, 1991, and it was the vision of Genevieve Vaughan, trying to do continuity, as she explained, to the strength of the women's tent in Nairobi, Kenya in 1985, that even though the non-governmental forums, what they were called afterwards, really had no formal or institutional links to the official conference, had an amazing experience, because it was women from different countries in conflict talking to each other about peace and about war and about development and about all the issues that showcased that women had a commonality that was beyond the nationalities that we lived with. And it had such an impact that in the development of Feminist International Radio Endeavor after, that was 6 years after that conference, I still heard the stories. And one story that I'm going to tell you about it is that because this was the height of the Cold War, when the official conference in Nairobi were discussing the issues, and they knew about this tent, so there was a rumor, a very strong rumor. The USSR delegation, the Russian or Soviet Union delegation, was saying that the CIA had funded that tent. And so there was a big scandal, and the media was trying to figure out what were the sources of funding of that tent that was creating such a havoc about women coming together, Palestinian women with Jewish women, women from the United States with Nicaraguan women, women from the United States with Russian women. The US delegation had to sit with practically everybody because the US was at war with everybody. But then the US delegation said that the KGB had funded that tent. So I remember a Mexican woman telling me the story that, because she was a journalist, that the journalists were asked to go into the tent and just ask the women who had funded them to come to the conference. And the women didn't know. The women said, well, I just got a ticket in my mail and it was invited to the conference. I don't know who funded it. And the reason why they didn't know that who funded them is because it was a coalition very much moved by the generosity of Genevieve and the action of women like WILF, Women's League for Peace and Freedom, and the Quakers, and many, many other women organized around peace that had organized this without wanting to get any credit for it. And I have to say that story because it's one that was very dear to my heart in understanding why Genevieve, without even knowing Katerina and I, in the boondocks in Costa Rica, had hired us and given us the responsibility and the gift of being able to run a radio station, a radio program, even though we didn't even have any experience, because she really trusted and believed that when women organized to get the job done, about changing the paradigms and about reshaping and agendas, that she trusted it was going to be done. She later created the Foundation for a Compassionate Society, and that's where she decided to create Feminist International Radio Endeavor. The second, I think, the second part that you will see in that, I don't know why I'm looking at myself instead of looking at the slides. Thank you, Diane. So the second one has to do with that she was funding at Radio for Peace International so that we could do an autonomous program, and that was really critical. The third one is that the radio producers that we were in Costa Rica were became part of another amazing development that Genevieve organized, that we had weekly international conference calls. That's like nothing today, but you can imagine in 1991, being in Costa Rica, the global movement of feminists organizing to participate in all of the UN conferences, which didn't mean participating in the UN. It meant coalescing to organize an international agenda with a feminist perspective. And I will get into that and what I learned about it in our coverage. So Genevieve organized this weekly collective meeting on phone where I was able to talk to women in Germany, women in Africa, women in the United States. Frieda was in it. Many, many women about what was happening and what we could broadcast about. And that was very amazing because we really felt that we became not only the producers of the international program, but we became part of a global feminist movement that was shaping an international agenda. And that was really critical, and there was no technology about it, and it must have cost a fortune because it was an hour. It was called a conference call. I don't know if Genevieve and Frieda remember. And we would, every week, we would talk about what was happening and what we could broadcast about or what, and we would report about what we were doing. We offered Jen to do yearly reports about what we were doing. She said, I don't want any report from you. I know what you are doing because we are all part of the same movement. Use your energies and your time to do the job. And that's exactly what we did. But we also sent her reports that I think she never read, but it doesn't matter. It was part of our ethics. The other one that was very important is that the women in feminist, in community radios that we knew as being part of the feminist movement had a voice locally in their communities, which was really wonderful. But when we realized that ours was an international, the first international venue, then we decided to call on women that were doing local radio and air their programs if they send it to us in cassettes through the mail, which is what was at the time. So we provided wings at that time with an international venue to be able to broadcast their program, and also the smallest community radio station anywhere in Asia, Africa, Latin America, the United States, Europe. They send us their cassettes in the mail, and we would broadcast and air them internationally. So it means that the international audience could know communities and the plights and the struggles of women by listening to the program. And the last one that there's two more that I want to highlight, is that we learned very soon that harnessing the technology ourselves was the power of being able to bring women's voices on the international arena. And we realized that there was very cheap technology that we could, and we improvised, and we learned to use what was called an interface that we learned from the guys who did the broadcasting of football games. It was a little piece of technology that fit in one hand. It's called an interface, and you connect it to a telephone, and you can broadcast. We could broadcast into the radio station in Costa Rica, and then anything would be aired internationally from anywhere in the planet. And believe me, we have been almost anywhere in the planet, whether it's the smallest conference of women that they realized that if they invited us, they could, only for a cost of a telephone call and a plane ticket, have their activities be aired internationally, as well as every international conference where women were claiming to have a voice and a say about the agenda, and had a radio station where they could have that voice. So learning to do the technology and doing cheaply was very important. If I have time, I will tell you stories about how we did that in Beijing when every other women's media was kidnapped by the authorities at the airport. But when they looked at our little bag and we opened it, and they asked Katarina, so what is this for? Oh, we're going to broadcast internationally the conference. And they laughed because they thought we didn't understand the question. So they let us go through, and we broadcast every day from the official conference and from the NGO forum also. And the other thing that we did is realizing that there was a lot of feminist written media that was also developing at the time, that we began to train them to be able to put their written media in radio format, to be able to distribute it also to the local communities and to have it internationally. Now, with that, with those characteristics, I want to take you to the next slide, and I'm going to talk. Yes, thank you. So, what I want to give you is the context of the first international radio station, and what I said to you that it was umbilically linked to the globalization or internationalization of the feminist movement. Because what was happening at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s is that women who had been very active in the revolutionary movements in Africa and Asia and Latin America, everywhere, to be able to oust dictatorships and be able to create a context where we could have people's needs met, which included ours, we were realizing that neither in the revolutionary processes nor in the peace processes that followed after we were able to end the dictatorships had anything to do about women unless we organized and coalesced and created a feminist movement ourselves. And that was true about so many women that I later met in FIRE that I couldn't believe when I went to my first international conference, and I will tell you what it is later, and began interviewing women from Africa, women from the English-speaking Caribbean, women from Latin America, women from Eastern Europe, indigenous women, Afro women, all voices. I couldn't believe that I was becoming part of a movement that had come to the same conclusion that I had learned in being in El Salvador 4 years, and in Nicaragua 4 other years, 8 years, in the midst of the revolutionary processes about what to do in the outcome after ousting the dictatorships, and had come to realize and became a feminist in those processes, realizing that when I was in the liberated zones in El Salvador at the beginning, I thought, oh, so this is like going in the tunnel of the future, because it's the guerrilla what governs with the people that are in those zones. So it means that I'm going to know what is in for women in the revolution. And then after 4 years, realizing there was nothing unless we did it for ourselves and organized ourselves. So I always say that I am a feminist daughter of the failures of the intentions of revolutions that didn't deal with the issue of the place of women in our societies. And I will also address that. So this was true about those of us who were in countries that had been ousting dictatorships, but that's not the only thing that was happening in the world. There were also many countries, like, for example, Costa Rica in Central America, that did not have a dictatorship. There was the whole Caribbean English-speaking that socially, culturally, economically, and politically did not have to deal with dictatorships, but had to deal with what was happening to women, but not in the case of dictatorships. And so it was in Africa and many other places. What allowed us to coalesce is that from those very different perspectives, we understood that there was no economic, social, cultural, political system in any of our societies that was going to deal about women and women's perspectives on all issues unless we organize to bring it about ourselves. Nobody was going to do it for us. And also realizing that there were many things that we could not achieve locally with our governments, regardless of how progressive they were, unless we also went to the international agenda, put it there and bring it back and hold them accountable to their own international institutionality. And that's what coalesced the beginning of the internationalization of the feminist movement. And it happened to happen in the beginning of a decade that was the decade when the United Nations was holding yearly conferences about critical issues in the planet. to try to be able to bring about a expansion of an agenda that, even though it was important in the planet, the agenda of the human rights framework, that there were so many other issues that were not addressed and needed to be addressed. And so that's where the umbilical cord became a action plan about bringing the voices of women. And if you can take the next one, Diane. So for us, feminist radio is about bringing the voices of women. And what we learned very quickly is that when you broadcast women's voices, everything is news. Everything is news. First of all, because it's women speaking in the air. And media used to be very male control, and Frieda went through that about how it happened in the US, and it was happening everywhere. So just listening to women was news, because news is what is new. And it was new to listen to women. But it wasn't merely listening to women. It was also that women had a message that was very different to the message that the media was able to hear when the structure of media and the power of media was in the hands of unusually white males. That has also changed, but a little bit, but white males, and especially the establishment. But when women occupy a space of our own, like community radio and feminist media, we deal with the intersections of all aspects of life and livelihoods. And I believe, and this is where I'm going to talk about the gift economy in the terms that I embrace it, because I believe that us being part of a maternal species, designed by the gifts of nature, whether we are mothers or not, to guarantee the reproduction and regeneration of life itself, life doesn't split any agenda into its parts. It is one and only. And that is what women know, because we are designed to have to deal with all of it. The third one is the broadband scope. What do I mean by that? That there has always been a debate because of the development of the feminist movement in the 70s, in the 80s, and still in the developed countries where women organized, for example, the suffragettes to get to be able to vote, that there were liberal rights that women had to have a right to. But our agenda as feminists is not about women's rights, not in the South and not in the feminists anywhere in the planet that understand that there is a connection between the lack of women's rights and the lack of everybody's right by systems that are controlled by patriarchal, capitalist, supremacist, and predatory visions and politics. And so broadcasting women's voices also becomes news, because we bring perspectives that are nowhere else to be found except in the way that women in the indigenous communities and women in communities that have stayed more grounded to the rest of nature have been able to contribute. It's not about women's rights, it's about women's perspectives on all issues. And let me just go through quickly, because I only have about 10 more minutes. Let me go quickly about how this expressed itself in every UN conference that we covered as FIRE and that many of you were a part of. So we go in 1991, 92, to the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. And while the corporations and the governments were saying that we're here to save the planet because the planet needs to be saved, women were saying our bodies are our first environment and you cannot separate. We are here to be able to do what the human race has to, the human species has to do, be able to change the course. I had a very good journalist friend who was broadcasting from the United Nations that I met every year in every conference, and his questions were the ones that allowed me to systematize what I'm going to share with you now. His name was John, and I can't remember his last name, but I went to the Earth Summit, and it was my first international radio responsibility, and there was a women's tent, and it was women were very vocal and very well organized to influence that conference. So when I met him in the media room, and that's the day we became friends, he said to me, so I want you to tell me why women are in this conference. This is a conference about the environment. It's not about women. And I just looked at him and I said, so what was your first environment? He said, oh, I come from, I can't remember, it was somewhere in California. I said, no, I'm asking you, what was your first environment? He said, that one. I live in a small town in a city, blah, blah. I said, what was your first environment? It was the body of a woman, your mother. Everybody who's in this planet, human being today, was born, and their first environment was a woman. We are here because our bodies are our first environment, and we are responsible for it and for its connection to everything else in the planet. And furthermore, it is the first environment in every human being that is born, and you cannot separate it from the agenda of this conference. So then my issue was how to convince him to come to the women's tent and see for himself, and he did. And it was very interesting because we developed a friendship about him understanding at least that feminism was not only about women's rights, and it was definitely not against the boys in the band who could do the good job. So next conference, we go to the Human Rights Conference in Vienna. And again, I find him. And this time he couldn't ask me, so what are you doing here? This is a conference about human rights. So he says to me, so tell me, what rights are you talking about? And I said to him, I'm not going to tell you this time. I'm going to invite you to come to the Tribunal on Women's Human Rights tomorrow. And you will see for yourself what rights we are talking about. And it's about every right in this planet. And you will see for yourself. And it was very interesting because after that tribunal that we organized, where women testified about all of the issues that were in the Human Rights Conference that had to do, where women had took cases about, and there was a caption that he did that I imagine that those of you who were there remember, that said, after that tribunal, nobody ever asked again, what rights are women talking about? And he did it. And it was very interesting. Then we met again the next year in the conference in Cairo, of the demographic conference about trying to dress up the demography about controlling women's bodies and women's lives. And we were there to say, we have a right to choose. We have a right to decide, because it is our bodies and it is our planet and it is our nature and our culture to decide about our reproduction. And it was a big fight. I remember that I was asked by the feminists to debate in radio, because radio, Christian Science Monitor, you remember, Frieda, was going to do one with the delegate of the Pope, and a debate between a feminist and a delegate of the Pope. I think that was the last time that there was a dialogue or a debate between the two of us. So the feminist movement asked me to be there to do that, because I knew about radio and international communications, and also because I was a former nun, and whatever the reasons. And it was so interesting. It was the last time. I can't remember the name of the archbishop that was there in the name of the Pope debating, and should get we have the files, but it was very interesting because he said, I want to know why you are here. You know nothing about the church as a feminist. And I said to him, I am a theologian, a former nun, and if you want to start throwing around your Bible things, go ahead, shoot. And he was dismantled, and he couldn't put it together. I didn't have to say much else. So it's about understanding that women, feminist perspectives are about all issues and changing the paradigm and changing the power relationships. Next. Oh, sorry, I missed one. The conference after the one in Cairo was the conference on development. The women's conference 1995. Look at the world through women's eyes. So it was an agenda of the non-governmental forum that was recognizing that what we had to say was not give us some rights, give us a room, give us women's rights, but it was about changing everything. And then the one in Durban about development really did it, because we were challenging now with a lot of other movements, like the indigenous people's movements, like the people, the ecologists and everybody else, about neoliberal policies that were going to affect us. And I believe that the emergence of the neoliberal structural adjustment programs was what in 1990, 80, at the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, coalesced us as feminists from North and South to understand that there was a design with the end of the polarization of the Cold War, a design to be able to move an agenda that was going to affect all of us, no matter North, South, East, West, rich, poor. That was going to affect all of us, and that we have to take a stand about that integration of an agenda that was not only about women's rights, but about everything else. So every conference, I just wanted to give you a pincelada about how in every conference that issue explained itself, because I think that we still are, and sometimes it gets worse, like now, that there are still many feminists struggling for women, what is called women's rights, in isolation from all of the other needs to be able to change the way that we humans are living in the planet. And that is not solved by having women's rights. Women's rights is important, because when women have a better status in whatever system, then we are able to use our best forces to be able to move an agenda that is also about ousting those systems that keep us stranded from the contribution that we make and can enhance to be able to make better. Next. So I want to show you just a few of the captions about the working fire. Everything that I have talked to you about is in the book to your right, bottom right. It's a book that Genevieve published, where we have produced in that book all of the voices that we covered from 1991 to 1996 when we were in shortwave. And so that book, I call it the Global Oral History of Women, because it's about the radio that we produced together with all of the radio programs around the world and the coverages that we did about everything. And it is the oral history, because women are our best when we speak. We do not produce written as much as we do talking. And when we do radio, that's what gets registered. So that is the history up until then. At that moment, we moved into internet radio, and we made another contribution, that is that we created the first international women's internet radio station, because we had harnessed the technology, because we had done international radio, and because we knew that the emergence of what was then called the new technologies of internet communication were going to create an even bigger struggle about being able to have a voice and to harness those technologies so that they won't eat us up. What I believe today, and I'm going to end with that, we are no longer invisible. Nobody in this planet is invisible today. We are disappeared. And that is because of all the strategies that are being used by patriarchy, capitalism, supremacism, and depredation to silence those voices that have already put the system at stake about its nature. And I want to leave with that. And I want to show you the last slide because, so if you put the last one, that this is where I am broadcasting now from, because I am on strike for Palestine, but also because the students in Costa Rica today have joined the international students on their encampment against the genocide in Palestine. And they asked me to be solidarious with them. And I am doing that by expanding my personal strike into a tent in solidarity with that movement that is not only putting in jaque the US now, but also understands that it is about Palestine and is struggling strongly to be able to keep that in the agenda. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to have done this. I was, I said to Frieda and to Genevieve, I don't know why I accepted. I have too much work, but I am very happy to have had to revisit this. And thank you very much for listening. So let me just take you a little bit to the tent.
Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, Maria and Frieda, that was so impactful to hear the scope of both of your commitment to bring women's voices and support women's radio. I think we have a few questions, but before we do that, Jen, is there anything you'd like to say before we actually open the floor to questions?
Well, not really, except I'm just so proud of all the work that you all did. And it's just miraculous and wonderful that, and I think it was a wonderful contribution that you've made all these years. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen. All right, we're going to go with Liliana first, and then we'll go to Judith. So Liliana, you have a question for us?
Yes, I have a question. For both of you, what was the hardest thing about your radio work?
What a good question. You want to go, Frieda?
What was the hardest thing about your radio work?
Well, gosh, it's hard to say. I mean, one of the hard things was trying to go up against the patriarchal media and be part of it, and to have women who were embedded in that be really mean to us sometimes because they didn't want to be associated with that because they would lose their status. I've been reading this book, Caste, by Isabel Wilkerson, and yeah, they didn't want to be associated with the lower caste, which was feminists and all of us. But anyway, yeah, that was hard, but it was also interesting and a challenge. So yeah, I don't know what else to say. One time I was editing and with a razor blade and cut the end of my thumb off, but anyway, that's another story.
That's a different story. What about you, Maria?
It's the same, but I'm going to talk about a little different angle. It's the same. It's about being able to legitimize our radio productions so that it could have an influence on journalists also, not only on society, because then if you could influence journalists, then you would have a multiplying effect in the media. But it was very hard, even within the feminist media, because written media had a hierarchy over radio, And women who had studied journalism had a hierarchy over community radio producers. So we had a hard time, and the debates were amazing in Latin America. And the mainstream feminists, so we had a movement that was called PC and Pepe. Periodistas were the real ones. And PC were the periodistas communicators, were a second hierarchy, and that was us. And it was so hard that I studied journalism and became a journalist much late in the 2000 something, after 10 years doing the radio, so that I could understand their language and be able to try to dialogue with them. And I studied journalism for 2 years, and I thought, why did I study this shit, you know? Women's radio cannot be about that. It's the framework that Frieda said, you know, that Frieda explained, that Donna Allen explained about media. I said, why do, you know, no wonder they can't understand us. They dropped everything that they are about. So then finally, we won the debate, because I was able to prove to the women in Mexico and the Argentinians that were the strongest one. I said to them, you know, you have so much power as PP, as periodistas, as mainstream journalists. You have so much power in the media that you have had to create alternative media to be able to have them give you a space in the media. And that ended the discussion. It wasn't one or the other. It was having a strategy for alternative media, a strategy for mainstream media, and all of us using the power of the microphone to speak from ourselves and not from the profession.
Thanks, Maria. Frieda, yes.
I was just going to add about influencing the other media. For years, Wings used to go to the public radio conferences and try to promote Wings to the public radio stations. And one time there was an opening for a new show. It was going to be a show about business. And they had an open house, and I went to the open house, and the guy who was the head of that was speaking to me, and he said, well, so what are you doing? And I told him about the show, and he said, a show only about women, isn't that rather narrow? I said, not nearly as narrow as a show only about business. Women are more than half the people in the world. Well, damned if that didn't start putting on a piece about women. And years later, I actually donated to the KUT station in Austin for that show, Marketplace, because they were still doing pieces about women as part of their work.
That's great, Frieda. All right, let me check in with Judith. Judith, do you have a question for our speakers?
Actually, this is a segue to what I was going to ask, so it's carrying it a little bit further, and that is your relationship with conventional radio. When I was in Nova Scotia in the early 70s, the morning show had a contest that you should illustrate what the announcers looked like. And at the time, there were 5 full-time announcers, and they were all men. And so I made little stick figures, and I said, this is what all of your announcers look like. And I had 5 little stick men. And then I said, this is what at least one of them should look like. And I had a little stick woman. And it quite upset them. They got back to me and they said, well, you know, we hire people on a short-term basis, or, you know, for specific stories. But it wasn't too long after that they finally got a full-time woman. And now here in Ottawa, the morning show host has been a woman for quite a while. So my question is, in what ways do you think you've influenced conventional radio and conventional media in general?
Oh, very good question. Very good question. Frieda, you want to talk first?
Go ahead. I'll keep thinking.
Okay. No, I think it's a very important question, because what Judith is raising is that when it's like building an autonomous feminist movement, when you build power, of your own, then the other powers realize, because they are very competitive and they have to be competitive in the media, then they realize that they are missing something and that there are audiences that are not going to listen to them. So they begin to look into it. They can't do it the same way we do it, but they, today we have more broadcasters and producers and women in media than ever before in history. And that has not happened because they make their own changes. It's happened because we have a broad movement, because we have only talked about radio, but the movement of women doing their own magazines, their own newspapers, their own productions, their own universities, they're creating all of the culture, the feminist culture of being able to have a voice about our science, about our lives, about our perspectives. It's something that has influence. And that's why I say that today we are not invisible, because invisible we were when we didn't have that movement and those venues and didn't have a voice. But today, capitalism and patriarchy is so pervasive that they have designed a strategy to make us be disappeared. They know we're there, but we're disappeared from their media. How does that happen? I'm not going to go into it because that's a whole nother salon, and it can't happen now. But how do they do it? That's why fake media has emerged. It's the sociopath perspective of having people distrust listening to media, so that they can continue with their power and the media doesn't play. And it's the fake news. It's also about bringing the voices of women who have nothing to do with their own perspective, but with capitalism and patriarchy. Talk as feminists. Give me a break. Give me a break. Feminist is not an ideological movement that you can be in it with your diversity of perspectives. No. Feminism is a transformative political strategy of women to be able to change the world, the way in which our human nature and species is in this planet, and killing it for all of us. You cannot talk as a feminist and be a feminist for colonialism. What is colonialism done for women? So those are two of the strategies about rendering us disappeared, because invisible we aren't.
Frieda.
Well, I'm remembering something you said a while back, Maria. You were talking about that first women were not at the table, and then we were at the table, but I think the word you used was that we were transparent. In other words, that you were there and you could even talk, but you couldn't be heard. And that is something that is still happening. But I think so. I went to an NPR conference, and they had a thing where there was a panel of guys, as it turned out, a couple of guys who were going to listen to stories that people had brought and comment on them from the public radio perspective. So I brought a story that I had produced from Jen's conference on radiation and breast cancer. And it had, what's her name, Jen? Bella Abzug. And it also had the guy who had been in charge of the Chernobyl cleanup from Vladimir Chernosenko talking on this panel. Well, after it played, the white guy spoke up and he said, "Where's the balance?" Meaning, I suppose, where's the balance in favor of radiation or something? I don't know. And there was a Latino guy there also on the panel, and he said, "This is not about balance." And I forget exactly what he said, but basically, it was about conveying information. And so that was good. But I've talked with various people, including Maria Martin, who unfortunately just passed away, about what happened when Latinos got inside the public radio movement. And basically, even though they had this show, Latino USA, they were always being censored by the establishment, you know, that this is too biased, this is too biased. And there were issues that they really weren't allowed to talk about and within that context. So, but the good thing is that, as you were saying, there's now so much other media. And yeah, the right wingers are putting out there totally wacko stuff and people are believing it. But also, we can get around this conventional media more and more and, you know, go into all these spaces. I mean, I've started, Facebook is censoring what we can post from Canada now. We can't post any links to journalism, the news, because some won't go into what law that Canada passed. But then I found out about another place to share called Mastodon. And Mastodon is part of a network of networks that are all, it's kind of like the old BBSing system where, you know, you had your group space online, but now these intersect with each other. And so there's a whole ecology of information that is bypassing the conventional media. And I think, you know, we've got some good opportunities in there to get our stuff around.
Thanks, Frieda. Let me check in with Liliana, see if there's another question for that that you have
Yes.
for our group.
Yeah, I have a question from Marta Benavides, and she asked, I'd like to hear a little bit about how to work on these very ultra-right war times, which includes the destructive dictatorships, etc. Marta Benavides. I can ask it again.
I think that's a pretty clear question, Liliana, but it's
Okay.
very broad, and I'm not sure, Maria and Frieda, if you can just, I don't know if this has to do with media, but it's actually how it works with radio, or is she
Yes.
asking your
Yeah.
opinion? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Frida, you want me to go?
Yeah.
Go.
Go ahead, Maria.
So I have to give an example because it's very broad, but it's a very good question.
Yeah.
And I want to get into the example of what's happening in Palestine, because this is my analysis, but it's not mine. It's an analysis that has been circulating and that I have integrated. It's my vision. Today, in the midst of that horrible genocide, for the first time, the victims are telling us their own plight and story and pain with their cell phones. For the first time, at least in my life, I have seen and heard the victims, kids, adults, women, everybody, and calling on us to do what we can do about it. That has had a very profound impact on me as a feminist, as a radio producer, as a journalist, as an everything. It has had a profound influence because I had only seen that when I was directly in the middle of the war in El Salvador or in Nicaragua. But to be able to have it today in the international media and the networks is an incredible shift that we have to take very seriously. It doesn't happen more because it costs them their lives, but it is very important. Every scream of every child and every woman and every man that gets on their phone and calls on us is the scream that we really have to hear and respond to. And I think that's a huge, huge shift. And that is what has made the fake news and the way that all of our solidarity is delegitimized, what has made it become so strong, because they know we are listening to each other's plight. The second one is that conflict has been on for so long, and it's not the only one that has been long, for so long, and so many issues that many of our countries and territories have gone through. Apartheid, colonialism, settler colonialism, Zionism, ethnic cleansing, devastation of the territory so that people can live in it. It's so long with all of, for other countries, it's one or the other. And now it's all coming together. That it is very important for us in the media and in all of us as media. You know, I had Tumi in South Africa. I went to do broadcast from there in the first women's conference after the end of apartheid. And I saw this young girl, 14, South African woman that asked me if she could learn to use my tape recorder. And I said, Tumi, be my assistant because I'm going to go crazy. I can't interview everybody in this conference. So I showed her to use the microphone. And so when she had the microphone, I opened mine and I said to her, Tumi, what do you feel about doing media now? She said, and I never forget, she looked at me and she said, you know, before, only a little piece of South Africa was open to me. And now all of South Africa is open to me. And it was so amazing to me, for me to understand apartheid, but also the way that she felt she was part of an international community when she was able also to broadcast internationally. So what I want to say with this is that I know I'm going in circles because, you know, bringing the issue of Palestine is very, I don't know, but we have to do our best everywhere. We all, okay, so what I'm going to tell you with this around the story about Tumi is that we are all media people in this conflict. We all have to become media people and talk to everybody and everywhere we can. It's the minimum, our voice. I remember when I was disappeared in Honduras, and one of the women said to me, so how did you manage? And I said, there are times in life where all you have is your voice and you have to use it. And this is a time when we have our voices and a lot of other resources that we better use for the best outcome that has to come out of that genocide, because it is the right and the need of the Palestinians, and the planet is Palestine today.
Thanks, Maria. Frieda, thoughts you want to share? You need to unmute, my friend.
I want to say, first of all, Marta, that I know that you've been working on this kind of problem for pretty much your lifetime. And I want to thank you for that. I know that a long time ago, Wings covered you talking about the work that you were doing in El Salvador. But this thing that Maria was talking about, training the young people, opening up things to the young people. And of course, they can now train us about all kinds of media that exist that we don't even know about yet. But International Association of Women in Radio and Television has started a series of projects called to climate cell phone videos, and to go and teach young people in various places to make videos about what's happening with the climate exactly where they live, and then to help make those videos go viral, or as viral as we can. And I think that this is true, Maria, that opening it up to the next generation is absolutely essential, because they're ready. They're ready to talk about it. And they will have everything when we're dead. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Frieda. Yes, Jen. You need to unmute, my friend.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I think that the other half of the radio producers is the listeners. And you can't have communication without somebody listening. And and what we have to do now is to be able to listen to the truth of what's coming out of Gaza and Israel, and understand that there are biases going on that are being put out there on purpose to hide the truth, and we need to be able to discern which is which. And it is our duty to listen to the people who are suffering and take a stand if we can, wherever we are. So radio, television, all of the kinds of reporting that are being done from Gaza and have been done by Palestinian reporters, because Israel would not let outside reporters come in there. So it's all been done by the Palestinian reporters, and many of them have died. They've been like 140 have been killed in trying to do the reporting. So I listen to Al Jazeera a lot on television, and other programs. And I just think it's important to keep our ears open and our eyes open to what is going on, and not allow ourselves to be bamboozled and manipulated into not seeing.
Thanks, Jen. I wanted to just point out, just as a reference, that, you know, the experience that we had most recently with the maternal gift economy and modern matriarchal studies was, you know, these young people are on platforms where their voices are actually playing to millions of people. So as an example, there was an article that was published, and the woman that none of us knew had 6 million followers. And, you know, she's on a platform that none of us are on. So I think this is very critically important that we know that the multi-generational conversations need to happen, because the people who are younger are actually on different platforms, and they need to be able to send that truthful information in the direction of where the youth is actually speaking from. You know, that's one thing that I just wanted to point out. And, you know, like the Philippines, I was just looking, because in the Philippines, there's 169 million subscribers using telephones as their basic communication. They don't even have the internet. They mostly are all on their phones. So the apps on their phones are what they're using. Me, I'm a Luddite. I'm an old timer. I come from, you know, the computing age. So I resist doing the phone. Again, we need to have younger women who are willing to actually disseminate the information. And there is a glut of information, which means that we do need to be grounded and know, you know, where the sources are that are accurate, because Jen is calling for the truth to be heard. And Maria keeps talking about fake news. And there are a ton of people who think fake news is the truth. And that's what we have, you know, it's our job to help tease that apart for them, so that they can learn the skill to discern between fake news and how to follow the truth. You know, that I think is a challenge. Frieda.
I just want to add that the bad news travels so much farther and faster than the good news, that the problems travel so much farther and faster than the solutions, and that we are at risk of despair really. And I think that maybe when we work with the young people or whoever we're working with, we need to try to get more of the ideas and the voices. I mean, there are places that these things are coming out, but we need to try to steer people to more constructive discussions and information and voices, and not only do what the mainstream media so enjoys, which is to talk about how awful everything is.
Thanks, Frieda. Let me check in with Judith to see if there's a question that she has for our speaker.
Once again, your answers have anticipated my question. In the 70s, again, the CBC in Halifax did a test about whether you could tell if a tape had been edited or not. And what they did was take the audio tapes, which is what they had in those days, and cut them in various places and splice them back together again, and then see if people listening to them could tell that they'd been changed. And I thought it was a really interesting experiment, but because you can always tell if what you have is the original or a copy, and on the original you could see the splices, I'm not sure how long-term useful it was. So my question is, how has changes in technology, at least with the technology now, you won't be cutting your fingers off. How would changes in technology affect your work, and both positively and negatively?
Maria.
Well,
Frieda, would you like to go first?
Yeah, Frieda, go
Yeah, I
ahead.
might as well go because that I have. Oh, so in my work, of course, it's all gone to digital editing now, and to be frank, I can edit in such a way that people can't tell it's been edited when they're listening on the radio, I think, for the most part anyway. And I do things like somebody keeps saying and all those things, and I don't have time for all that in the show, so I can cut all those things out so that it just flows really nicely, and they and they sound convincing. But now the thing is that they can even make videos that show somebody speaking in a completely false, not even their words, put into their mouth and stuff like that. So there's a lot of really bad deception going on. Anyway, I'm not going to be using AI for that kind of thing, but we do have to. I'm not sure how the hell we deal with that. There's always going to be crooks, and there's always going to be cheaters, and it goes way back in time. Not to the very beginning, but certainly to the patriarchy and capitalism, that people are cheating other people. And I don't know, we just have to offer as much wholesome material as we can.
Yeah, I think it's important. One of the things that's critical is to really be paying attention to one another and who our friends know are, and our friends of friends know are reputable sources. Always find where your source is coming from, because some people will just click on something and pass it on. So, Maria, do you have a response to the question that Judith posed, good and bad?
So I agree with you that I don't know what to do about AI yet. And I know I'm not going to use it, but I don't know what to do about it because it's too recent, and you really have to design strategies for emerging technologies when you already know what they're all about. That's why we have to continue learning and updating ourselves about the use of the technology so that we can harness it to do what we want to get done and not that they rule our lives. That's one rule that I have for myself. Another one is to check the sources, and we do have the possibilities with WhatsApp. You know, we do have the possibilities with the technology to be able to check on our sources, and that means organizing. We have to continue organizing as the broadest movement that we can become, because that is what is going to keep us from being influenced by the way that the control of media. I mean, my biggest fear is that I won't even want to be on Facebook anymore, that I won't even want to be on WhatsApp anymore, that I don't want to listen to television anymore, that I will become an isolated person because the bombardment is so much that it stresses. So I'm trying to deal with the stress because I cannot get disconnected. And connecting means today being able to make collective with the people that we trust, the people that we know, and the people who are being impacted mostly by whatever the issue is that we're talking about. Today, the Palestinian women are making such a contribution to us that is not even funny, and they have not been heard fully yet. But they are making an amazing contribution. I will wait for them to tell us, but I want to tell you something. When I say that the whole world is becoming Palestine, what I mean is that the policy of the West and patriarchy and capitalism and supremacism today is about getting rid of the people in the places where they have to control the territory for their own good. And today they don't care. Before it was about, it could be about getting them to work for us, getting them, enslaving them. No, now it's about disappearing them and keeping the territory. Believe me, I'm telling you as a Puerto Rican, what the governor of Puerto Rico said after the Hurricane Maria in a WhatsApp to the corporations and to the United Nations corporations. What I offer you is a Puerto Rico without Puerto Ricans. He had to resign when that came out. But in Puerto Rico, we could get him to resign. In Palestine, we can't. In Palestine, the Palestinians and us together have to stop that. And that is the destiny of the planet. If you look at every territory where there is conflict, and there's very few that there isn't, what they are is after. Why is it happening in parts of Africa? Because that's where all of the mineral resources to keep our technologies running on the behalf of the corporations where they are. And they are out to get rid of anybody who's an obstacle to them having that barren territory to do, because they don't even have an idea what they're going to eat. Maybe they're going to eat minerals, but they don't care. It's their money what's guiding them. So I think that we have to listen to each other, but we have to also reach out to the ones that we haven't heard yet, and the ones that in this kind of dire genocide cannot have a voice for themselves. So we have to reach out. We have to find the ways so that they have their voice, because they have something to tell us that we have to learn from that is really critical.
Thanks, Maria. I think we have time for one more question, Liliana.
Yes, I have one more question. Can you tell me, to both of you, which one is the program that you were the most proud of, or the one that you liked the best that you did?
Well, sometimes it's the one I just finished is the most exciting, whichever one that is. There have been some really good ones. I did a two-part series on the Women's Environment and Development Organization first conference in '91 in Miami. Whoops. And that had oh gosh, I'm starting to block on it, but it had all the resolutions and people's voices and stuff like that. I mean, it was really a good in-depth coverage of a conference where there were women from all over the world focusing on the issue of the environment and the planet. So that was, I'd say that's one of the top ones. Every once in a while I reissue that. And then sometimes there's also one on nonviolent communication that I like to reissue a lot because that's good advice.
Thanks, Frieda.
I have many, and most of them have been the ones where I have done live broadcasting from anywhere in the planet, from conferences, from meetings, from women's sick beds, from environmental issues, going around on horseback, broadcasting live, all of that. But I'll tell you, my favorite moment, because that's the message that I want to leave you with when we finish this broadcast. And I have told it already, but I'm going to tell it again. I think I told you, I don't know if it was a Wednesday or a Saturday meeting, but I was in the Human Rights Conference in Vienna, and we were broadcasting from the main conference, the main discussion in the plenary sessions that were very boring sessions. Sometimes they would get interested, but Ivanka Corti, who was an Italian feminist who was head of CEDAW at the moment, she made a statement, and the fundamentalists came on after her with such a stupid comment. I can't remember what it was. So she was so mad that she was storming out of the plenary session. And I ran out another door so that I could meet her when she opened her door. And I was broadcasting and she knew it. So when she came out of the door, I said, Ivanka Corti, what do you have to say to the world now? And she looked at me and she smiled and she took a breath and she said, all I have to say, it is a characteristic of feminists to never give up. And she left.
Oh, that's so beautiful. All right, everyone. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we're getting to the top of the hour, and it's been a really wonderful salon today with both Maria and Frieda. I want to take this moment just to thank both of you, and I'm wishing both of you that you find young women to mentor that will help carry on the voices of women and news internationally, that somehow we put a call out there so that the work can continue. I'm very aware that there are still places in the world, believe it or not, who still only have radio. They don't have the internet. They don't have computers. So we really need to continue your work. So thank you both so much. And Jen, thank you for your big vision, and seeing the importance of communication and the gift of language that is so critical to get to the truth so that the paradigms can shift. So thank you very much. And Diane, thank you for always keeping us on track here, keeping our system going, keeping us on time. Liliana and Judith, thank you both for scouring the questions, coming up with other ones, and for being present with what's here today. On behalf of the International Feminists for the Gift Economy Network and for myself, thank you, the audience that's here today in our Zoom room, and those of you who are viewing later. Thank you for joining us. This work needs to continue. Our voices need to continue. The good news needs to get out, and the news that will shift the paradigm. As challenging and difficult as it is, the truth needs to be told. So thank you, everyone, for actually using your voice in that way. Our recording is going to be posted on our website, and I want you to know that in 2 weeks, we're going to have our next salon on May 18th, salon number 64, which is a follow-up to our salon number 58, the gift of shared purpose for uniting people and movements, part 2, bridging the gap with vision, with Mickey Kashkan, Vonda Perez, Bissoni, Emma Quayle, and Manenka Letecia. They're saying, imagine coming together to materialize the maternal gift economy. In this salon, we continue the experiment that started in salon number 58. We are designing it to be fully interactive, which means it will be not in this format, webinar, but in the meeting format. As we look at the questions that arise when we move towards more togetherness and at how we answer them from where we each are as individuals and movements. Everyone is welcome to join and invited to watch the earlier recording. We would like to invite you all to come and join us. So with that, we have to say goodbye for today. Take really good
Thanks,
care,
everybody.
everyone.
And I want to say, don't forget that the video will be around, so your friends who didn't come to this can still watch it. It'll be on maternalgifteconomymovement.org.
Take good care, everyone. Bye for now.